What if I told you that everything you believed about strength was completely wrong? What if you discovered that clinging to things, to people, to pain, to the past doesn't make you stronger, but turns you into a slave to your own chains? The Stoic millionaire learned this the most brutal way. He had built an empire, accumulated what seemed like infinite wealth, surrounded his life with luxuries and comforts. But when the crisis came, when he lost everything in one night, he realized something that would forever change his understanding of true power. It wasn't what he had that made him strong, but his capacity to let it go. Sitting in the empty office of what once was his company, surrounded only by boxes and memories, he experienced a revelation that the ancient Stoics had taught for centuries. Marcus Aurelius had written in his Meditations, "Accept the things to which fate binds you, and love the people with whom fate brings you together." But that night, the Stoic millionaire understood that accepting wasn't enough. You had to go further. You had to master the supreme art of Stoicism, letting go. Today you're going to discover why releasing the past, pain, expectations, and even your own ego isn't an act of weakness, but the most sophisticated power move that exists. You'll learn the 8 Stoic lessons that transformed the Stoic millionaire from a broken man into someone unbreakable, not because of what he had, but because of what he was able to release. This isn't theoretical philosophy. This is practical Stoicism, applicable from the moment you finish hearing these words. Because at the end of the day, the Stoic life isn't about avoiding suffering. It's about developing the inner strength so that nothing external can steal your inner peace. Prepare to question everything you thought you knew about control, self-discipline, and true emotional independence. Because after these 8 lessons, you'll see that the ultimate act of self-control isn't holding on tighter. It's having the wisdom and courage to let go. The Stoic millionaire vividly remembered that early morning when he received the call that would change everything. The markets had collapsed, his investments evaporated, and in a matter of hours, decades of work became red numbers. His first reaction was panic, then rage, then denial. He fought against reality like a drowning man fights against ocean waves. But there was the first mistake. He was wasting energy fighting against what had already happened. Stoic philosophy teaches us the dichotomy of control with a clarity that can be brutal. There are things under our control and things that are not. Epictetus expressed it with devastating simplicity. Some things are under our control while others are not. Under our control are our opinions, aspirations, desires, and the things that repel us. Not under our control are our body, our property, our reputation, our position, and in a word, everything that is not our own actions. This isn't just an abstract philosophical lesson. It's the fundamental foundation of all authentic personal development. When the Stoic millionaire finally understood this truth, he experienced what the Stoics call ataraxia, a profound tranquility that comes from aligning your expectations with reality. Most people live in constant internal struggle, spending emotional and mental energy trying to control the weather, others' actions, the past, the future, the economy, politics, others' opinions. It's like trying to stop a hurricane with bare hands. Not only is it useless, it's self-destructive. The ancient Stoics understood that true emotional management begins when you stop fighting against reality and start working exclusively in the only arena where you really have power: your own responses, decisions, and attitudes. Marcus Aurelius, who ruled the most powerful empire in the ancient world, wrote in his personal reflections, "Confine your attention to what is in your power. Don't worry about what others say or do, not even about what you do yourself, but only about what is in your power to do." Direct practical application. The next time you feel anxiety, stress, or frustration, ask yourself this fundamental question: is this thing that's disturbing me under my control or not? If the answer is no, consciously practice the art of letting go. It's not about becoming apathetic or indifferent. It's about redirecting all that energy toward where you can actually make a difference. Create a 2-column list: under my control and outside my control. In stressful situations, classify each element of your worry into one of these categories. You'll discover that 80% of your worries fall into the second column. Now you have a choice. You can keep wasting energy on that 80%, or you can become a master of the 20% where you really have power. The Stoic millionaire learned that when you release the illusion of control over the uncontrollable, you don't lose power. You concentrate it. Instead of dispersing your energy across 100 different fronts, you channel it like a laser toward the only battles you can actually win, the ones you fight with yourself. This lesson isn't mastered in a day. It's a daily practice, moment by moment. But every time you consciously choose to release what you can't control, you develop a muscle of emotional independence that no external circumstance can weaken. And there, in that apparent surrender, you find true strength. As Seneca wrote to his friend Lucilius, Nothing, for one who is anxious, is in the future. Everything is in the present. If you learn to live in the present, you will have learned to live. The present is the only territory where your control is real and absolute. The second lesson that transformed the Stoic millionaire came when he realized he had been carrying emotional baggage for decades that no longer served him. Resentments from failed businesses, guilt over wrong decisions, pain from betrayals, regret over lost opportunities. It was like walking through life with a backpack full of stones, each representing a moment from the past he refused to release. The Stoics understood something profound about the nature of time and memory. The past exists no more than as a set of thoughts in your present mind. Marcus Aurelius expressed it with sword-cutting clarity: confine your attention to what is present. What is past can no longer touch you. Yet most people live as if the past were a tyrant dictating their present. Seneca shared with Lucilius a devastating reflection on this topic. It's likely that some evils have happened to us, and it's certain that some will happen to us. But it's useless to torment yourself in advance with an evil that may never come, and it's equally useless to torment yourself afterward with an evil that has already passed and cannot be changed. The Stoic millionaire had built a mental prison where he himself was the jailer. Every morning, instead of waking with energy to face new possibilities, he would get up carrying yesterday's mistakes, last week's errors, last year's failures. His mind was a courtroom where he constantly judged himself for decisions he could no longer change. But here's the revelation that changed everything. Forgiveness isn't just for others, it's the most powerful tool of personal liberation. The ancient Stoics practiced what we might call personal amnesty, a conscious process of freeing oneself from the tyranny of the past. Stoic philosophy doesn't preach denial or forgetting of the past. It preaches something more sophisticated: the transformation of the past from a source of pain to a source of wisdom. As Epictetus wrote, "It's not what happens to you but how you react to what happens to you that matters." This reaction includes how you choose to relate to your memories. The process of liberation from the past involves three fundamental steps that the Stoic millionaire called the Trinity of Liberation: radical acceptance, wisdom extraction, and energy redirection. Radical acceptance means fully acknowledging what happened without minimizing, justifying, or denying it. It's looking directly at the facts without the filter of reactive emotions. Wisdom extraction involves asking, what can this experience teach me about myself, about life, about how I want to act in the future? Energy redirection means taking all the emotional energy you were investing in reliving the past and channeling it toward building your future. Direct practical application. Identify the 3 past experiences that occupy the most mental space in your daily life. Write them down. For each one, complete these 3 sentences. I completely accept that happened. The wisdom I extract from this experience is the energy I was spending on this I redirect toward This exercise isn't a one-time event. It's a mental maintenance practice that Stoics performed regularly. Marcus Aurelius had the habit of writing personal reflections each night, processing the day's events not to judge himself, but to extract teachings and release what no longer served him. Personal amnesty doesn't mean becoming irresponsible or not learning from mistakes. It means freeing yourself from the destructive emotional burden that prevents you from using those lessons constructively. As Seneca observed, every new beginning comes from the end of some other beginning. The Stoic millionaire discovered that when he finally released the past, he didn't lose anything valuable. On the contrary, he gained something invaluable: present energy. All that mental and emotional force that was trapped in yesterday was freed to create tomorrow. The Stoic life isn't about having a perfect past. It's about having a perfect relationship with whatever past you've lived. And that perfect relationship is based on one word: freedom. Freedom to choose what meaning you give to your past experiences, and more importantly, freedom to not allow yesterday to hijack your today. If this content is inspiring you and these first 2 lessons are resonating with you, give the video a like, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who also needs to hear this. The world needs more people who understand the true power of practical Stoicism. Leave in the comments, which lesson has impacted you the most so far? I want to know your perspective and learn how these teachings are connecting with your own life experience. The third revelation came when the Stoic millionaire realized he had made the most costly mistake of all. He had built his identity on foundations of sand. His self-esteem, his sense of personal worth, his very definition of who he was, everything was tied to external variables that could change from one moment to another. For years, when people asked who he was, his automatic response included his achievements, his net worth, his social status. I'm the CEO of, I'm the owner of, I'm the one who generated X millions. He hadn't realized he was living a life of borrowed identity, where his value as a human being fluctuated with the stock market. The ancient Stoics understood something that modern society has completely forgotten. Your true identity has nothing to do with your temporary circumstances. Epictetus, who experienced the ultimate humiliation of going from slave to philosopher, taught that no man is hurt but by himself. This self-inflicted wound often comes from confusing what we do with what we are. Marcus Aurelius, despite having absolute power over the greatest empire in the world, constantly wrote reminders to himself about the transitory nature of all roles and possessions. Remember that very little disturbs one who has put his thoughts in order. You have no control over external events, but you can control the perspective you take on them. The Stoic concept of prosoche, conscious attention to one's own thoughts and values, includes a fundamental practice: regular separation between the essential self and accidental circumstances. The Stoics distinguished between what they called internal character, ethos, and external circumstances, taiaktos. When the Stoic millionaire lost his fortune, he initially felt he had lost his identity. But gradually he began to make a revolutionary distinction. He had lost his possessions, but he hadn't lost his capacity to think, to choose, to act with virtue, to learn, to love, to contribute. Circumstances had changed, but he was still himself. Seneca, who experienced both extreme wealth and forced exile, wrote a letter to Lucilius that perfectly encapsulates this lesson. He is not poor who has little, but he who wants more. What use is what you have stored if you don't enjoy what you have? The miser doesn't possess his money, the money possesses him. This lesson goes beyond material goods. It applies to all aspects of external identity: your job, your marital status, your physical health, your reputation, your past achievements, even your future plans. Stoic philosophy invites you to ask yourself, if tomorrow I lost everything I have in the external world, what would remain of me that is genuinely mine? Direct practical application. Do the nuclear identity exercise. Write a description of yourself without mentioning any external circumstances. Not your job, not your possessions, not your achievements, not your marital status, not your age, not even your physical appearance. Describe who you are using only your values, your inherent capacities, your character, your principles. This exercise can be initially disconcerting because we're conditioned to define ourselves by our circumstances. But when you manage to articulate your identity in terms of internal qualities, you discover something liberating. You are unbreakable. The Stoic millionaire developed what he called anti-fragile identity, a conception of himself that not only resisted crises but strengthened with them. He began to identify as someone who can adapt to any circumstance, someone who finds opportunities in difficulties, someone who maintains their values regardless of external context. The Stoics regularly practiced exercises of imaginative detachment, where they visualized losing everything external to strengthen their sense of internal identity. It wasn't masochism, it was mental training. Like an athlete who trains with heavier weights to make actual competitions feel easier. Deep emotional management begins when your emotional well-being stops depending on variables you don't control. When your self-esteem no longer fluctuates with the stock market, when your sense of purpose doesn't collapse if you lose your job, when your personal worth doesn't depend on external approval, then you've achieved what the Stoics called autarkia, emotional self-sufficiency. This isn't a lesson about becoming indifferent to external success or failure. It's a lesson about maintaining clear perspective on what you really are versus what you temporarily have or do. As Epictetus taught his students, no man is free who is not master of himself. True personal development begins when you understand that you can lose everything that's outside you, but no one can steal what's inside you unless you allow it. And that realization isn't a loss of power. It's the discovery of the greatest power of all: sovereignty over your own soul. The fourth Stoic lesson that revolutionized the Stoic millionaire's life came when he realized he had been living like a frustrated film director, trying to control everyone else's life script. His expectations about how people should behave, how events should unfold, how the world should respond to his actions, had become a constant source of disappointment and resentment. Marcus Aurelius wrote a reflection that cut straight to the heart of this problem. When you wake up in the morning, think of what a precious privilege it is to be alive, to breathe, to think, to enjoy, to love. Then make your day worthy of this gift. Notice he doesn't say, when you wake up, think about how your day should unfold according to your plans. The ancient Stoics understood that expectations aren't neutral. They're disguised forms of trying to control the uncontrollable. Every expectation is essentially a demand you make to the universe. Things should happen this way. And when the universe doesn't comply with your demands, which is most of the time, You experience what Epictetus called disturbance of the soul. Seneca explained it with a powerful analogy. It's as if you went to a banquet and demanded to be served exactly the dishes you want, in the order you prefer, in the portions you consider correct. You can make those demands, but you're going to go hungry. Or you can enjoy what's served and be grateful for the invitation. The Stoic millionaire had fallen into the expectations trap on multiple levels. He had expectations about his employees, they should be more loyal; about his clients, they should be more rational; about his family, they should be more understanding; about the government, it should be more efficient; about the economy, it should be more stable. Each unmet expectation was a small betrayal that accumulated resentment. But here's the revelation that changed his perspective. Expectations don't predict the future, they contaminate it. When you arrive at a situation with rigid expectations, you're not really present. You're constantly comparing reality with your mental script, missing the opportunity to respond creatively to what's actually happening. Stoic philosophy proposes something radical: replace expectations with conscious preferences. The difference is subtle but transformative. An expectation says, "This must happen for me to be okay." A preference says, "This would be nice, but I'll be okay regardless of what happens." Epictetus taught his students a practice he called the discipline of desire. It wasn't about eliminating all desires, but about keeping them light, flexible, non-attached. Like willow branches that bend with the wind instead of breaking by resisting it. Direct practical application. Identify the 3 expectations that cause you the most frustration in your daily life. They might be expectations about other people, work situations, project outcomes. For each one, practice this reframing. Instead of X should happen, say, "I would prefer X to happen, but I accept that Y is also possible, and I'll find a way to work constructively with either." This practice requires what the Stoics called epike, conscious suspension of automatic judgment. Instead of reacting immediately when things don't go according to your script, you create mental space where you ask, "What opportunities does this situation offer that I hadn't considered?" The Stoic millionaire developed a morning practice that transformed his relationship with expectations. Each morning, before checking his agenda, he took 5 minutes to establish what he called flexible intentions. Clear objectives about what he wanted to accomplish, but with total openness to the day unfolding in unexpected ways. Marcus Aurelius had a similar practice. He wrote, "When you arise in the morning, prepare yourself to meet interfering, ungrateful, insolent, deceitful, envious, antisocial people. All these qualities come from their ignorance of good and evil. But whoever understands the nature of good and evil cannot be hurt." This isn't an invitation to pessimism or lowering your standards. It's an invitation to what the Stoics called premeditatio malorum, the anticipatory consideration of possible difficulties, not to expect them, but to be mentally and emotionally prepared for any scenario. The result of releasing rigid expectations isn't disillusionment, it's liberation. When you don't have a specific script the world must follow, you can appreciate life's improvisation. You can respond creatively to unexpected situations instead of resenting them. As Seneca wrote in one of his most profound letters, "Every change of fortune affects either your person or your possessions. A wise man is prepared for either." This preparation doesn't come from planning for every specific contingency, but from developing the mental and emotional flexibility to adapt to any contingency. The Stoic life recognizes that the universe isn't conspiring either for or against you. It's simply unfolding according to its own laws. Your job isn't to control that unfolding, but to develop the self-discipline and resilience to thrive within it, whatever form it takes. The 5th lesson that transformed the Stoic millionaire was perhaps the most painful to recognize. He had been living much of his life as an actor seeking applause, making decisions not based on his deep values, but on what he believed others expected or would approve of. This revelation came during one of his darkest nights, when he realized that many of the business decisions that had led to his downfall hadn't been made from personal conviction, but from the desire to impress investors, competitors, media. He had been building a life designed to obtain external validation, and when that validation evaporated, he was left feeling empty. Epictetus, who intimately knew the experience of being at the mercy of others' opinions during his years as a slave, taught something revolutionary. If you want to improve, accept being considered ignorant or stupid in external matters. Don't desire to be considered wise, and if some believe you're an important person, distrust yourself. The ancient Stoics understood that the need for external approval is one of the most subtle but devastating forms of slavery. Marcus Aurelius, who had the power of life and death over millions of people, wrote personal reflections where he constantly reminded himself of the importance of emotional independence. How little trouble those give you who don't seek to ingratiate themselves with you. Stoic philosophy teaches that when your emotional well-being depends on others' approval, you've handed over your personal power to forces completely outside your control. People's opinions change like the weather. They might approve your decision today and condemn it tomorrow, based on incomplete information, personal prejudices, or simply their own emotional states at the moment. Seneca shared with Lucilius an observation that cuts to the heart of this topic. It's impossible for a man to learn what he thinks he already knows. And it's impossible for a man to be free if he constantly seeks others' approval to validate his decisions. The Stoic millionaire had fallen into what modern psychologists call other-directedness. A life orientation where decisions are made based on perceived expectations of others instead of internal values. He had developed a hypersensitive antenna for detecting disapproval, and that hypersensitivity had led him to betray his own convictions multiple times. But liberation from the need for approval doesn't mean becoming antisocial or completely ignoring others' perspectives. The Stoics distinguished between conscious consideration of relevant opinions and emotional dependence on external validation. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Don't explain your philosophy. Embody it." This phrase perfectly encapsulates the Stoic attitude toward public opinion. Live according to your principles with such consistency that your actions speak for themselves, without need for constant justification or seeking applause. Direct practical application. Implement what the Stoic millionaire called the autonomous decision test. Before making any important decision, ask yourself, if I knew no one else would find out about this decision and I would receive neither approval nor disapproval for it, would it still be the same decision I would make? If the answer is no, you're making the decision for the wrong reasons. This practice reveals how many of our daily decisions are contaminated by the search for external validation. From the clothes we choose to wear to the opinions we express, from the careers we pursue to the relationships we maintain, the influence of sought approval is more pervasive than we imagine. The development of emotional independence requires what the Stoics called autarkia, psychological self-sufficiency. This doesn't mean social isolation, but having an internal emotional center of gravity so solid that you can interact with others from a position of strength rather than need. Epictetus taught his students, "No man is free who is not master of himself." Mastery over oneself especially includes mastery over the need for external validation. When you don't need others to tell you who you are or how much you're worth, you can relate to them from a place of genuine generosity instead of transactional need. The Stoic millionaire developed a practice he called conscious internal validation. At the end of each day, instead of reviewing what approval he had received or sought, he asked himself, "Did I act today according to my deepest values? Did I make decisions I can respect regardless of how others perceive them?" This practice gradually shifted his source of self-esteem from external to internal. He began to experience what the Stoics called eudaimonia, a deep satisfaction that comes from living in alignment with virtue, regardless of external recognition. As Seneca wrote in one of his most powerful reflections, "The man who doesn't know where he's sailing, no wind is favorable to him." When your decisions are guided by internal compass instead of by the wind direction of public opinion, you can navigate with clear purpose regardless of how popular or unpopular your choices are. Liberation from the need for approval isn't a one-time event, it's a daily practice of self-control and self-discipline. But every time you choose to act from your deep values instead of from seeking applause, you strengthen your personal sovereignty and move closer to authentic Stoic life. The sixth revelation came when the Stoic millionaire realized he had been living on an emotional roller coaster, where his happiness and inner peace rose and fell according to external events. Good sales numbers equals good day. Media criticism equals bad day. Investor approval equals great week. Legal problems equals terrible week. He had handed over control of his emotional well-being to a constantly changing world, without realizing he was living as a prisoner of circumstances. This lesson was especially brutal because it challenged a fundamental belief that modern society aggressively promotes, that happiness comes from getting what we want and avoiding what we don't want. The entire personal development industry, advertising, even many life philosophies, are built on this false premise. The ancient Stoics understood something that modern psychology is just rediscovering. True happiness is independent of external circumstances. Marcus Aurelius, who faced plagues, wars, political betrayals and devastating personal losses, wrote, "The happiness of your life depends on the quality of your thoughts." Epictetus took this teaching to its logical extreme. It's not things that upset us, but our judgments about things. This phrase isn't just abstract philosophy, it's a precise description of how human experience works. Between any external event and your emotional response, there's a space where interpretation occurs. And that interpretation is completely yours. The Stoic millionaire had fallen into the trap of what psychologists call hedonic adaptation, the human tendency to quickly return to a baseline level of happiness despite positive or negative events. He had experienced this multiple times: the euphoria of a great business achievement that faded in days, or the devastation of a loss that, with time, became the new normal. But the Stoics went beyond simply observing this pattern. They developed specific techniques for what they called ataraxia, emotional imperturbability that doesn't depend on favorable circumstances. Seneca wrote to Lucilius a letter that perfectly encapsulates this teaching. The happy man is one who doesn't depend on fortune for his happiness. External goods can make life more comfortable, but they cannot make the man better or happier in the deep sense. Stoic philosophy distinguishes between pleasure, which depends on circumstances, and deep happiness, which is a cultivated internal state. Pleasure comes and goes. Deep happiness, when properly developed, remains stable even during external difficulties. This isn't an invitation to misunderstood Stoicism, becoming emotionally flat or indifferent. The Stoics experienced the full range of human emotions. The difference was that they didn't allow those emotions to dictate their fundamental well-being or important decisions. Marcus Aurelius developed a practice he called the view from above, imagining himself observing his life from a cosmic perspective, where immediate problems were seen in their true proportion. He wrote, "You can rid yourself of many useless things among those that disturb you, for they exist entirely in your imagination, and you will then gain for yourself an extensive region of tranquility." Direct practical application. Implement the independent happiness inventory. Make a list of things you currently believe you need to be happy. Then for each item ask yourself, is this really necessary for my deep well-being, or is it something I'd like to have? Then develop what the Stoic millionaire called base happiness, a state of satisfaction and peace you can access regardless of whether you have those external things. This practice reveals how much of our supposed need for certain circumstances is really social conditioning. The Stoics understood that you can enjoy good things when they come, without depending on them for your emotional stability. The process of developing emotional independence from circumstances involves 3 progressive levels. The first level is basic stability, not allowing external events to cause extreme emotional fluctuations. The second level is active resilience, maintaining clear perspective and constructive response capacity even during crises. The third level is what the Stoics called joy, a deep satisfaction that comes from living virtuously, regardless of external context. Epictetus taught that we can train our mind like an athlete trains their body. Every time we consciously choose not to allow an external circumstance to dictate our internal state, we strengthen what he called the muscle of conscious attention. The Stoic millionaire developed what he called inner strengthening practices: morning meditation on permanent values versus temporary circumstances, nightly reflection on moments of the day where he maintained inner peace regardless of external events, and regular exercises of premeditatio malorum, imagining possible losses to more deeply appreciate what he had and mentally prepare for any change. The ancient Stoics didn't promise that life would be easy if you followed their teachings. They promised something better: that you could maintain your dignity, purpose, and inner peace regardless of how difficult external life became. As Seneca wrote in one of his most profound reflections, "The wise man can lose everything except what is most important, his character. And his character cannot be touched by external circumstances unless he allows it." This lesson isn't mastered by reading about it once. It requires daily practice, patience with yourself when you fail, and long-term commitment to developing self-control. But every small step toward emotional independence from circumstances brings you closer to what the Stoics considered true freedom: sovereignty over your own inner world. The 7th Stoic lesson that revolutionized the Stoic millionaire's perspective was perhaps the hardest to accept for someone who had built his professional identity on having the right answers. He realized he had been treating every conversation, every debate, every difference of opinion as a battle he had to win, without considering the emotional and relational cost of this compulsive need to be right. This revelation came during a particularly intense discussion with his business partner, where he realized he was more interested in proving he was right than in finding the best solution to the problem they faced. He had turned the search for truth into an ego competition, and in the process had lost both perspective and the relationship. Marcus Aurelius wrote about this topic with honesty that cuts to the bone. Whenever you want to cheer yourself, consider the good qualities of your companions, for example, the energy of one, the modesty of another, the generosity of a third, and so on. Nothing delights as much as the examples of virtues manifested in the character of those who live with you. The ancient Stoics understood that the compulsive need to be right is a disguised form of uncontrolled ego. Seneca wrote to Lucilius, "No one can hurt you without your permission. And the quickest way to grant that permission is to allow your ego to feel threatened every time someone disagrees with you." Epictetus took this teaching further. When someone is clearly wrong, don't correct them publicly. Instead, ask yourself if understanding that they're wrong is enough for you. Because the goal isn't to win debates, but to live in harmony with wisdom. The Stoic millionaire realized he had been confusing having an informed opinion with needing others to validate that opinion. The first is a sign of careful thinking. The second is a sign of emotional insecurity disguised as intellectual conviction. Stoic philosophy teaches something counterintuitive. Admitting when you don't know something or when you're wrong is a demonstration of strength, not weakness. It requires more self-control and self-discipline to recognize the limits of your knowledge than to pretend omniscience. Marcus Aurelius had a personal practice of writing reflections where he consciously sought perspectives that challenged his own opinions. He wrote, "Whenever you think something is impossible or cannot be done, remember that others have found ways to do it. Your knowledge is limited, their creativity may not be." The process of freeing yourself from the need to be right involves developing what the Stoics called intellectual humility. This doesn't mean becoming passive or not defending important principles. It means distinguishing between non-negotiable principles like honesty, justice, compassion, and debatable opinions like specific strategies, interpretations of events, predictions about the future. Direct practical application. Implement the 10% rule. In every conversation where you feel the urgent need to correct someone or prove you're right, ask yourself, is there at least a 10% chance this person has a valid point I'm not seeing? If the answer is yes, change your focus from winning the argument to understanding their perspective. This practice reveals how many of our automatic corrections are really ego defenses disguised as truth-seeking. The Stoic millionaire discovered that when he stopped needing to win every debate, he began learning much more in every conversation. The Stoics also developed techniques for what they called charitable interpretation. Instead of immediately looking for weak points in others' arguments, they practiced finding the strongest and most reasonable version of what the other person was trying to communicate. Seneca wrote, "Each new day brings us new opportunities to learn. But only if we approach that day with open mind instead of closed agenda." This mental openness requires the humility to recognize that your current understanding, no matter how solid it seems to you, can always expand. The Stoic millionaire developed a practice he called defensive curiosity. Every time he felt the impulse to aggressively defend a position, he asked himself, "What could I learn if, instead of defending, I asked more questions?" This simple reorientation transformed many of his interactions from battles to collaborations. Liberation from the need to be right also includes what the Stoics called intellectual courage, the courage to change your mind when you encounter better evidence. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "If anyone can show me that I am wrong and that my view is incorrect, I will gladly change my mind. I seek the truth which has never harmed anyone." This intellectual flexibility isn't inconsistency, it's integrity. It requires more character strength to admit you were wrong than to stubbornly maintain an unsustainable position to protect your ego. The ancient Stoics understood that the wisest people are often the most aware of how much they don't know. Socrates, who profoundly influenced Stoic thought, said, "I only know that I know nothing." This wasn't false modesty. It was recognition that reality is more complex than any individual mind can completely grasp. The result of releasing the compulsive need to be right isn't becoming intellectually passive. It's developing what the Stoics called practical wisdom, the ability to maintain firm principles while remaining flexible in methods and open to new information. As Epictetus taught, the only true wisdom is knowing that you don't know. And the only true strength is not needing others to recognize your wisdom or your strength. This paradox is at the heart of the seventh Stoic lesson. When you stop needing to be right all the time, you curiously end up being more effective at finding useful truths. The eighth and most profound lesson that transformed the Stoic millionaire was the most challenging of all: the need to confront and dissolve the layers of false identity he had built around his ego. This lesson came as a brutal revelation when he realized that much of what he considered his personality were actually defense mechanisms, social masks, and conditioned reactions he had developed to protect an idealized image of himself. During his years of success, he had built what psychologists call inflated ego, a magnified version of himself that needed constant feeding through achievements, recognition, control over others, and external validation. When all this crumbled, he found himself face to face with a terrifying question. Who was he really when all the masks were removed? Marcus Aurelius struggled with this same theme throughout his life. Despite being the most powerful person in the known world, he constantly wrote reflections about the illusory nature of ego and the importance of connecting with something deeper. One of his most penetrating observations was, "Remember that very soon both you and everyone you know will be dead. And soon after, even your names will be forgotten." This wasn't a morbid reflection, but a Stoic technique for dissolving the exaggerated importance the ego gives to its own image and legacy. The Stoics understood that the ego is essentially a collection of stories we tell ourselves about ourselves, and many of those stories are designed more to protect our self-esteem than to reflect reality. Epictetus, who had experienced extreme humiliation as a slave, developed a profound understanding about the nature of ego. He taught, "You are not your reputation, you are not your achievements, you are not your possessions, you are not your relationships, you are not even your thoughts and emotions. You are the consciousness that observes all this." This distinction between the observer and the observed is fundamental for liberation from the ego. Seneca wrote extensively about what he called meditatio mortis, meditation on death, not as a morbid practice, but as a tool for maintaining correct perspective on the relative importance of the ego. Every day you live is one less day you have left. This realization can lead you to panic or to liberation, depending on how much of your identity is tied to temporary things. The Stoic millionaire began practicing what he called ego dissection, a systematic process of examining each intense emotional reaction to identify what aspect of his personal image felt threatened. He discovered revealing patterns. He got angry when they questioned his intelligence, he got depressed when he lost social status, he became anxious when he couldn't control others' perceptions. Direct practical application. Implement the ego triggers inventory. For 1 week, every time you feel a strong emotional reaction, anger, anxiety, sadness, shame, ask yourself, what aspect of my personal image feels threatened in this moment? Write down the answers. At the end of the week, look for patterns. These patterns show you exactly where your ego is most attached and where you need to work on detachment. The Stoics developed specific techniques for what they called ego dissolution, gradual dissolution of false identifications. One of these techniques was the regular practice of negative visualization, imagining the loss of everything the ego uses to define itself: status, possessions, abilities, even life. The goal wasn't to become depressed, but to develop what Buddhists call non-attachment, and Stoics called ataraxia. Marcus Aurelius practiced a form of meditation where he imagined himself as an insignificant particle in the infinite cosmos. He wrote, "Asia and Europe are just two small corners of the universe. The entire ocean is a drop compared to eternity." This cosmic perspective didn't make him feel insignificant in a depressive way, but free from the pressure of his ego being the center of the universe. Liberation from the ego also involves what the Stoics called memento mori, reminder of mortality. Not as an obsession with death, but as a tool for liberation from the tyranny of the ego. When you truly internalize that your time here is limited, many of the ego's concerns, impressing others, accumulating status, winning trivial debates, lose their apparent urgency. The process of ego dissolution gradually revealed what the Stoics called the true self, the capacity to observe, choose, love, learn, contribute. These capacities don't depend on external circumstances nor need constant protection like ego constructions. Epictetus taught his students, "You are an actor in a play. If it's short, then it's short. If it's long, then it's long. If he wants you to play a poor man, play even that role skillfully, and the same way if a cripple or a public official or a private citizen." This actor analogy perfectly illustrates the Stoic relationship with the ego. You play the roles life gives you, but you don't completely identify with any of them. The Stoic millionaire developed a nightly practice he called ego review. Each night, before sleeping, he asked himself, "In what moments today did I act from my ego, seeking to protect or inflate my image, versus from my authentic self, seeking to do what's right regardless of how it made me look?" This practice allowed him to identify and gradually reduce automatic ego reactions. The ancient Stoics didn't see ego dissolution as loss of personality or becoming boring. On the contrary, when you don't need to constantly protect an artificial image of yourself, you can be more authentic, spontaneous, and genuine. As Seneca wrote, "When you stop pretending to be someone you're not, you can finally become who you really are." This 8th lesson requires the greatest courage of all, because it involves the willingness to die, psychologically, allowing false versions of yourself to dissolve so something more real and lasting can emerge. As the Stoics understood, this death of the ego isn't the end of who you are. It's the beginning of who you can really become. The ultimate freedom of Stoicism doesn't come from controlling the external world, but from freeing yourself from the need for the external world to validate or protect your sense of identity. When you achieve this liberation, you discover what Marcus Aurelius called the inner citadel, a space of peace and strength that no external circumstance can touch. When the Stoic millionaire completed his transformation through these 8 lessons, he realized something that forever changed his understanding of true power. He had begun his journey believing that control meant holding on tighter, that strength meant resisting harder, that success meant accumulating more possessions and recognition. But at the end of this Stoic learning process, he discovered a paradoxical truth. Maximum power comes from the supreme capacity to let go. He hadn't lost anything essential during his financial fall and personal reconstruction. On the contrary, he had gained something invaluable: the freedom to be truly himself without needing the external world to validate that authenticity. He had developed what Marcus Aurelius called the inner citadel, a space of peace and strength that remained intact no matter what storms raged outside. The 8 lessons worked together as an integrated system of liberation. Releasing control of the uncontrollable had given him mental clarity. Freeing himself from the past had returned his present energy. Detaching his identity from results had given him emotional stability. Releasing expectations had opened him to possibilities he would never have considered. Freeing himself from the need for approval had given him personal sovereignty. Detaching happiness from circumstances had given him unbreakable inner peace. Releasing the need to be right had given him genuine wisdom. And freeing himself from the ego had given him access to his true power. Epictetus had taught that no man is free who is not master of himself. The Stoic millionaire now deeply understood what this maxim meant. Real self-discipline wasn't the ability to force the world to behave according to his desires. It was the ability to maintain his values, his inner peace, and his capacity for constructive response regardless of how the world behaved. Seneca had written, "Every new beginning comes from the end of some other beginning." Everything the Stoic millionaire had released: false control, past wounds, borrowed identities, rigid expectations, need for validation, dependence on circumstances, inflated ego, had created space for something better. Genuine self-control, liberated energy, authentic identity, adaptive flexibility, emotional self-sufficiency, independent happiness, powerful humility, and connection with his true self. The Stoic life he had developed wasn't a life without emotions or ambitions. It was a life where emotions informed but didn't dictate, where ambitions motivated but didn't define, where achievements were celebrated but weren't needed for self-esteem. It was a life of authentic resilience built not on the ability to avoid difficulties, but on the ability to maintain wisdom and virtue during any difficulty. Marcus Aurelius had written, "Confine your attention to what is present." The Stoic millionaire now lived this teaching. His attention was present. His energy was present. His capacity to contribute, love, learn, and grow was completely present, not dispersed in regrets of the past or anxieties of the future. The Stoic world he had built internally had become more real and solid than any external empire he had possessed before. No economic crisis could touch it, no criticism could destroy it, no loss could collapse it, because it was built on foundations that no external circumstance could move. But perhaps the most important thing he had learned was that letting go wasn't losing, it was conquering the most valuable territory of all: his own inner world. Each act of liberation had actually been an act of reclaiming his authentic personal power. The practical stoicism he had developed didn't require perfection, only constant practice. It didn't require eliminating all desires, only keeping them light. It didn't require becoming insensitive, only developing perspective. It didn't require isolating from the world, only not depending on the world for his fundamental well-being. And now, having integrated these 8 lessons into his daily life, the Stoic millionaire had found something money had never been able to buy him: true freedom. The freedom to be who he really was without apologies or masks. The freedom to pursue meaningful objectives without desperately clinging to specific results. The freedom to love without need, to contribute without expectations, to live without constant fear of loss. This is the final promise of Stoicism. Not that life will be easy, but that you can become unbreakable. Not that you'll never face difficulties, but that you'll develop the inner strength to transform any difficulty into an opportunity for growth. Not that you'll control the external world, but that you'll conquer the inner world. As Epictetus taught in his final lessons, when you learn to let go, you don't lose power. You discover where your true power always was. What are you willing to let go of today, to finally take true control? If this content inspired you and these 8 lessons of practical stoicism have resonated with your own search for personal development and inner strength, give the video a like, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who also needs to discover the true power of letting go. The world needs more people who understand that emotional independence and genuine self-control come from the wisdom of the ancient Stoics. Leave in the comments, which of these lessons are you going to apply in your life today? Stoic philosophy doesn't stay in theory, it's lived in daily practice. And your commitment to applying these teachings will not only transform your own life, but will become an example for others who also seek the true freedom that comes from releasing what they can't control and mastering what they can. The Stoic Millionaire's journey continues, and now you have the tools to walk your own path toward authentic Stoic life.